Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Sleepless Campfire. Tonight, we travel into the forgotten backroads of Kentucky's coal country places where light fades, and what remains are stories that refuse to die. The Appalachian Mountains hold centuries of secrets in their hollows, and the communities that have extracted their living from these mountains have accumulated tales that echo through the valleys like the mournful sound of distant train whistles. Across these hills, hollows, and mining towns are accounts drawn from Sheriff's Department files, witness reports, and archived broadcasts. Each one verified, recorded, and retold in their own words. These are not legends passed down through generations, but documented incidents that have puzzled law enforcement and terrified those who experience them. The coal industry has shaped this region both physically and culturally. Mines honeycomb beneath the earth like dark arteries, their entrances sometimes sealed, sometimes forgotten. Above ground, the landscape bears the scars of extraction. Slate dumps, decaying processing facilities, and communities that once thrived but now exist as shadows of their former selves. It is in these liminal spaces between abandoned prosperity and uncertain futures that our stories emerge. Sheriff's departments in Kentucky's coal counties maintain files on incidents that defy explanation. These aren't tales of ghosts in the traditional sense, but rather encounters with phenomena that operate outside our understanding of the natural world. They represent the collision between the practical, no-nonsense culture of mining communities and the inexplicable. Now, let us begin. With our first story, it was late October of 2012 when Deputy Michael Reynolds first encountered what would become known locally as the Harlan County Lights. With 14 years on the force, Reynolds had seen everything from domestic disputes to meth lab busts. But nothing had prepared him for what he would witness that cold autumn night. The call came in at 10:47 p.m. from a frantic truck driver who had pulled over on Route 387 near the abandoned Black Mountain Coal processing plant. The driver reported seeing strange lights moving in the trees behind the facility lights that didn't match any vehicle he was familiar with. Dispatch logged the call as suspicious activity and sent Reynolds to investigate, as he was the closest unit. As Reynolds approached the area, his patrol car's headlights cut through the thick Appalachian mist that clung to the road like a shroud. The abandoned plant loomed ahead, its skeletal frame silhouetted against the moonless sky. Reynolds noted in his report that the air felt unusually heavy that night, charged with static that made the hairs on his arms stand up. The only sounds were the crunch of his tires on the gravel shoulder and the distant call of a whippoorwill. The truck driver, James Wilson, was waiting beside his rig, visibly shaken. Wilson pointed toward the tree line behind the plant. "They're still there," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Been moving through the trees for the past 20 minutes. Not flashlights, not car headlights, something else." Reynolds retrieved his flashlight and walked toward the tree line, his hand resting on his sidearm. As he drew closer, he saw what had alarmed Wilson: a series of pale blue lights, approximately the size of basketballs, floating silently between the trees. They moved with impossible grace, neither falling nor rising, but drifting horizontally through the forest. Reynolds later wrote in his statement, "The lights appeared to have no source, no beams, no reflections, just self-contained orbs of blue luminescence." The deputy radioed dispatch to report what he was seeing, but his transmission was met with heavy static. When he tried again, he heard a strange whistling sound that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Wilson, who had followed Reynolds at a safe distance, later described the sound as like 1,000 tea kettles whistling at once, but muted, like you were hearing it through a wall. As the two men watched, the lights began to move in a coordinated pattern, forming a perfect circle before dispersing into the forest. Reynolds noted that despite their movement through dense trees, no branches disturbed, no leaves rustled. The lights seemed to pass through solid matter as if it weren't there. The incident lasted approximately 12 minutes before the lights vanished as suddenly as they had appeared. Reynolds and Wilson searched the area, but found no footprints, no tire tracks, and no evidence that anyone had been there recently. The only unusual discovery was a perfect circle of flattened vegetation where the lights had formed their pattern. Back at the station, Reynolds filed his report, which was subsequently forwarded to the state police. The official explanation listed in the file cites atmospheric phenomena as the likely cause, though no meteorological events were recorded in the area that night. Wilson submitted his own statement, which corroborated Reynolds' account in every detail. In the years since, the Harlan County lights have been reported by other deputies and civilians, always near abandoned mining operations, always under similar weather conditions. Reynolds, who retired in 2018, still maintains that what he saw that night defied logical explanation. "I've spent my whole life in these mountains," he said in a 2020 interview. "I know swamp gas. I know weather balloons. I know military exercises. This was none of those things. This was something else entirely." The file remains open in the Harlan County Sheriff's Department archives, marked Unexplained Phenomena. No trace of the light's origin was ever found. It was early March of 2015 when the Miller family first noticed the sounds in their rented home in the former coal camp of Bonnyman, Perry County. The house, one of a dozen identical company dwellings built in the 1940s, had been vacant for years before the Millers moved in. David Miller, his wife Sarah, and their 2 children had been living there for 3 months when the disturbances began. The first occurrence happened on a Tuesday night around 2:17 a.m. Sarah Miller, a nurse who worked the late shift at Hazard ARH Hospital, had just returned home and was preparing for bed when she heard what sounded like heavy boots walking across the wooden floor of the empty upstairs bedroom. David, a coal truck driver, was working a night run, and the children were asleep in their rooms downstairs. Sarah called out, thinking David had returned early, but received no response. The footsteps continued for approximately 30 seconds, moving from one side of the room to the other before stopping abruptly. When Sarah went upstairs to investigate, she found the room empty, the window locked from the inside, and no signs of forced entry. She noted in her statement to deputies that the floorboards had been cold to the touch, despite the home's central heating maintaining a temperature of 68 degrees. The phenomenon occurred intermittently over the next 2 weeks, always between 2 and 3 a.m., always in the upstairs bedroom. David experienced it himself on March 17th when he was home with a respiratory infection. He described the sound as heavy, deliberate footsteps, like someone pacing back and forth, weighing at least 250 pounds. When he entered the room, the footsteps ceased immediately. The Millers' 2 children, 8-year-old Emma and 6-year-old Noah, began reporting their own experiences. Emma told her teacher that the man in the boots visited her room at night, though she couldn't describe his face. Noah refused to sleep alone, insisting that someone walked in the hallway outside his bedroom. Concerned for his family's well-being, David Miller contacted the Perry County Sheriff's Department on March 28th. Deputy Brian Collins was dispatched to investigate. Collins's report notes that he found no evidence of intruders, no structural explanations for the sounds, and no signs of paranormal activity. He did, however, mention that his recording equipment malfunctioned during his visit, emitting only static when attempting to capture audio in the upstairs bedroom. The Millers' landlord, a descendant of the coal company that had originally built the homes, offered to release them from their lease, without penalty. Before they moved, Sarah Miller spoke with elderly neighbors who had lived in Bonnyman since the 1950s. One elderly woman, who wished to remain anonymous, told Sarah that the house had a reputation among locals as being unsettled. According to the neighbor, a mine foreman named Silas Henderson had lived in the house in the 1960s. Henderson had been involved in a mining accident that killed 3 men, an incident for which he blamed himself. The neighbor claimed that Henderson had taken his own life in the upstairs bedroom, though official records make no mention of this. The Millers moved out in early April 2015. The next tenants, a young couple without children, reported similar disturbances within 3 weeks of moving in. Their complaints to the sheriff's department matched the Millers' accounts almost exactly, though they described the footsteps as lighter, as if someone were trying to walk quietly. The house has changed hands 3 times since 2015, with each family reporting similar phenomena. The Perry County Sheriff's Department maintains a file on the property, noting multiple complaints of unexplained sounds, but no evidence of criminal activity or structural issues. The most recent entry, dated June 2022, contains a single note from Deputy Collins. Recommendation: historical research into property's previous occupants. No rational explanation for the footsteps has ever been documented. It was just after midnight on November 4th, 2018, when CB radio operator Gary Thompson experienced what would become one of the most baffling cases in Letcher County Sheriff's Department files. Thompson, a 53-year-old truck driver with 27 years of experience hauling coal through eastern Kentucky, was on Route 7 near Whitesburg when his CB radio picked up a transmission that shouldn't have existed. The night was particularly dark, with thick fog limiting visibility to less than 50 feet. Thompson, hauling a load of low-sulfur coal from a mine in Jenkins to a processing plant in Pikeville, had been driving for 6 hours. He was alone in his cab, as usual, with only the crackle of the CB radio for company. At approximately 12:17 a.m., Thompson's radio, which was tuned to Channel 19, the standard trucker frequency, suddenly went silent. The usual chatter of drivers reporting weather conditions and speed traps vanished, replaced by what Thompson described as a dead quiet that felt wrong. Then, a voice came through the speakers clear as day, despite the weather conditions. The voice, which Thompson later described as male with no discernible regional accent, said, "The mine at 3 Mile collapsed at 14 hours. All personnel accounted for except 3. Repeat, 3 miners unaccounted for." The transmission then listed 3 names: Thomas Riley, Michael Howard, and James Sullivan. Thompson, familiar with mining operations in the area, knew there was no active mine at 3 Mile Creek. The nearest mine was 5 miles away, and it had been closed since 2014. Concerned, Thompson called out on his CB, asking the other driver to identify himself and clarify his message. There was no response. What happened next chilled Thompson to his bones. The same voice came through his speakers, but this time it said, "Gary Thompson, your load has been compromised. Check your trailer." Thompson immediately pulled over to the side of the road, his heart pounding. He got out of his cab and inspected his trailer, finding nothing unusual. The coal was secure, the doors locked, and no signs of tampering. When Thompson returned to his cab, the voice spoke again. "The Henderson family needs your help. Their well has run dry. Turn left at the next intersection." Thompson, who knew the area well, was aware that there was no left turn at the next intersection, only a sharp right curve that continued along Route 7. By this point, Thompson was sufficiently alarmed to contact the Letcher County Sheriff's Department. Deputy Donna Williams took his call at 12:41 a.m., logging it as suspicious activity, possible radio interference. Williams advised Thompson to continue to his destination and file a full report in the morning. The next morning, Thompson went to the sheriff's department as requested. He gave a detailed statement to Detective Mark Reynolds, who had Thompson demonstrate the CB equipment in his truck. The radio worked perfectly, picking up normal transmissions from other truckers with no unusual interference. Detective Reynolds, intrigued by Thompson's story, decided to investigate the names mentioned in the mysterious transmission. What he discovered would deepen the mystery. Thomas Riley, Michael Howard, and James Sullivan were indeed miners who had died in a roof collapse at the 3 Mile Creek mine. But that accident had occurred on November 4th, 1978, exactly 40 years to the day of Thompson's strange experience. Further research revealed that the Henderson family had lived near the 3 Mile mine in the 1970s. According to old county records, their well had indeed run dry in November 1978, forcing them to haul water from a nearby creek until the mine company drilled them a new well. The Henderson family had moved away in 1980. The Letcher County Sheriff's Department opened an investigation into the incident, exploring possible explanations. Radio experts suggested that atmospheric conditions might have caused unusual radio propagation, potentially picking up signals from decades earlier. However, none could explain how the transmission knew Thompson's name or details about his current haul. Thompson, shaken by the experience, had his CB radio professionally examined. The technician found no modifications or defects that could explain the strange reception. Thompson continued to drive the same route for another year before retiring, but he never experienced anything similar again. The case file, designated LC 2018-1144, remains open in the Letcher County Sheriff's Department Cold Case Archives. Detective Reynolds, who retired in 2021, added a final note to the file. Some phenomena defy conventional explanation. This may be one of them. No rational explanation for the transmission has ever been found. It was early September of 2016 when search and rescue volunteer David Chenoweth encountered something impossible during a missing person case in Floyd County. The search for 72-year-old Earl Thompson, who had wandered away from his home in Betsy Lane, would become one of the most baffling incidents in the county's law enforcement history. The call came in at 6:30 a.m. on September 3rd. Thompson, who suffered from early-stage dementia, had last been seen by his wife around 10 p.m. the previous night. When she woke to find his bed empty and the back door ajar, she immediately called the Floyd County Sheriff's Department. Deputy Mark Richardson was the first to arrive, noting that the ground was damp from recent rains, which should have made tracking relatively easy. Chenoweth, a 45-year-old former Marine who had been conducting search and rescue operations in eastern Kentucky for over a decade, joined the effort at 8 a.m. The search party consisted of 8 volunteers, 3 deputies, and 2 K-9 units. They established a command post at Thompson's home and began methodically searching the surrounding woods, which were part of the reclaimed lands of the old Blue Diamond Coal Company operations. By noon, the searchers had found nothing unusual. No tracks, no discarded clothing, no sign that Thompson had entered the woods at all. The K-9 units had picked up a scent trail that led approximately 50 yards into the forest before disappearing inexplicably. As afternoon turned to evening, the search party expanded, with additional volunteers joining the effort. At 4:47 p.m., Chenoweth made a discovery that would haunt him for years. In a small clearing about a mile from Thompson's home, he found a series of footprints in the damp earth. What made these footprints disturbing was their size and pattern. They measured approximately 16 inches in length and 8 inches in width, far too large to belong to Thompson, who wore a size 10 shoe. Even more puzzling, the prints were spaced about 12 feet apart, suggesting an impossibly long stride. Chenoweth radioed his discovery to the command post. Deputy Richardson and another volunteer joined him at the clearing. Richardson photographed the prints and made plaster casts of 2 of them. The 3 men followed the trail of prints for approximately 200 yards before it simply ended, as if whatever had made them had vanished into thin air. What happened next would become the most disputed aspect of the search. As the 3 men stood around the last footprint, discussing their next move, they all heard a sound that Chenoweth later described as like a tree falling, but muffled, as if it happened underwater. At the same moment, all 3 felt a strange vibration through the soles of their boots. When they looked back at the last footprint, they found something new pressed into the earth beside it. A small, intricately carved wooden bird, approximately 3 inches in length. The carving was unlike anything any of the men had seen before. With detailed feathers and a curious symbol etched into its underside, a circle with 3 lines radiating from it. The search for Earl Thompson continued for 5 more days, eventually covering over 20 square miles of rugged terrain. On September 8th, a hunter found Thompson's body in a ravine approximately 3 miles from his home. The coroner's report listed the cause of death as exposure and hypothermia. What remained unexplained was how Thompson had traveled so far in such a short time, especially given his physical condition and the difficult terrain. The Floyd County Sheriff's Department conducted an investigation into the strange footprints and the carved bird. The wooden object was examined by several experts, including archaeologists from the University of Kentucky. None could identify the specific type of wood or the cultural origin of the carving. The symbol on its underside matched no known language or writing system. The plaster casts of the footprints were analyzed by anthropologists and wildlife experts. All agreed that the prints did not match any known animal species in Kentucky. Human experts noted that while the shape was roughly humanoid, the size and spacing were beyond human capability. The case file, designated FC 2016-0903, contains detailed reports from all search party members, photographs of the footprints, and multiple analyses of the carved bird. The official conclusion lists the footprints as unexplained phenomena of unknown origin, and notes that the carved bird remains unidentified. Chenoweth, who continued his search and rescue work for another 3 years before retiring, never encountered anything similar during his subsequent operations. "I've spent my whole life in these woods," he said in a 2020 interview. "I know every animal track, every human footprint. What we found that day wasn't from around here, maybe not from anywhere at all." The carved bird remains in an evidence locker at the Floyd County Sheriff's Department, its origin and purpose still unknown. It was late July of 2014 when Mine Safety and Health Administration Inspector Samuel Morrison discovered something impossible during a routine inspection of the abandoned Blue Diamond Mine No. 3 in Breathitt County. What began as a standard assessment of a closed facility would become one of the most perplexing cases in the county's history. Morrison, a 58-year-old inspector with 32 years of experience, had been assigned to conduct a quarterly inspection of the sealed mine. The Blue Diamond No. 3 had been closed since 1982, following a series of roof collapses, and had been properly sealed according to MSHA regulations. The inspection was routine, designed to ensure that the seals remained intact and no unauthorized access had occurred. The inspection began at 9 a.m. on July 22nd. Morrison was accompanied by 2 local deputies, Robert Wallace and Lisa Chen, who were there for security purposes. The 3 arrived at the mine entrance to find everything as expected. The main portal was sealed with a concrete barrier 3 feet thick, reinforced with steel beams. All warning signs were intact and legible. The inspection proceeded normally for the first hour. Morrison checked the exterior seals, measured methane levels, and documented the condition of the surrounding area. Everything appeared to be in order, and Morrison was preparing to conclude his inspection when he noticed something unusual near the western wall of the mine entrance. Approximately 20 feet from the main portal, partially obscured by overgrown vegetation, was what appeared to be another sealed entrance. This was unexpected, as mine records indicated only one portal for Blue Diamond Number 3. Morrison cleared away the vegetation to reveal a concrete seal similar to the main portal, but showing signs of much more recent construction. What puzzled Morrison was the seal's design. While it appeared to be made of the same materials as the main portal, the construction method was different. The concrete was smoother, with a more modern composition. More disturbingly, the seal bore no identification marks, warning signs, or MSHA certification stamps, all required by federal regulations. Deputy Wallace radioed the Breathitt County Sheriff's Department to report the discovery. Sheriff Daniel Williams himself arrived at the site at 11:30 a.m., accompanied by the county's emergency management director. After examining the mysterious seal, Williams authorized its removal, citing potential safety concerns and the possibility of illegal mining operations. A specialized crew was called in to carefully breach the seal. As the concrete was cut away, Morrison and the others prepared to enter what appeared to be a previously unknown section of the mine. What they found inside would challenge everything they knew about Blue Diamond Number 3. The passage beyond the seal extended approximately 200 feet into the mountain before terminating at a solid wall of rock. What made this discovery impossible was the mine's original schematics, which clearly showed that this area should have been solid rock with no coal deposits. Yet the passage was clearly a mine tunnel, with support timbers, track rails, and even an empty coal car identical to those used in the 1970s. Morrison noted several unusual features inside the tunnel. The support timbers, though weathered, showed none of the decay expected after 30 years of abandonment. The air quality was unusually good, with stable oxygen levels and no detectable methane. Most disturbingly, the floor of the tunnel was covered in footprints, dozens of them, all appearing to be of recent origin. The Breathitt County Sheriff's Department launched a full investigation. Mine records from the 1970s and 1980s were thoroughly examined, but none mentioned any secondary entrance or tunnel in this location. Former Blue Diamond employees were interviewed, including the mine's last superintendent, who insisted that no such tunnel existed during his tenure. The case took an even stranger turn when geologists from the University of Kentucky examined the tunnel. Their analysis revealed that the coal seam inside the tunnel matched that of Blue Diamond Number 3. But the surrounding rock formations were inconsistent with the known geology of the area. One geologist noted in his report that the tunnel appears to exist in a geological context that should not be possible. The investigation expanded to include federal agencies. The FBI interviewed local residents, searching for anyone who might have information about illegal mining operations. No evidence of such activities was discovered. The MSHA conducted its own investigation, eventually concluding that the tunnel's origin could not be determined through available evidence. The Breathitt County Sheriff's Department maintained the case file as an active investigation for 3 years before moving it to cold case status. The mysterious tunnel was resealed with a concrete barrier twice as thick as the original, and warning signs were posted around the perimeter. Morrison, who retired in 2017, maintained until his death in 2021 that the tunnel defied logical explanation. "I've been in hundreds of mines across this country," he told a colleague shortly before his retirement. "I know how they're built, how they age, how they look when they're abandoned. That tunnel wasn't built by anyone I've ever known. It wasn't built using any techniques I've ever seen. The sealed section remains behind its concrete barrier, its origin and purpose still unknown. It was early October of 2017 when freelance journalist Jessica Chen first noticed the pattern that would lead her to one of the most disturbing mysteries in Knott County history. What began as research for an article on the decline of Kentucky's coal industry would become an investigation into a series of disappearances spanning nearly 3 decades. Chen, a 32-year-old graduate student at Eastern Kentucky University, had been researching economic conditions in former mining communities for her thesis. She had spent weeks examining census data, employment records, and local newspapers when she noticed something unusual in the archives of the Knott County Enterprise. A pattern of disappearances that seemed to follow the closure of specific mines. The first documented case was that of Daniel Roberts, a 45-year-old miner who vanished on June 14, 1991, the day after the Black Star mine announced its permanent closure. Roberts was last seen leaving the mine's final shift, carrying a lunch pail and wearing his work clothes. His truck was found parked near his home, the keys still in the ignition. No trace of Roberts was ever found. 3 years later, on August 20, 1994, 2 days after the shutdown of the Red Fox mine, 19-year-old Sarah Mitchell disappeared. Mitchell, who had worked in the mine's office, was last seen walking home from her final shift. Her apartment was undisturbed, with her purse, identification, and money left behind. Like Roberts, no trace of Mitchell was ever discovered. As Chen continued her research, she found more cases. Michael Hayes, who vanished on September 5, 1998, following the closure of the Cumberland mine. Elizabeth Parker, who disappeared on October 12, 2003, after the Oak Hill mine ceased operations. And Thomas Wright, who went missing on November 18, 2010, the day after the Wolf Creek mine was permanently sealed. In total, Chen identified 7 disappearances spanning 19 years, all occurring within 3 days of a mine closure announcement, all involving individuals who had worked at the respective mines. What disturbed Chen most was that none of these cases had ever been connected in official investigations. Chen brought her findings to the Knott County Sheriff's Department in November 2017. Detective Matthew Harrison, initially skeptical, agreed to review the cases. What he found would lead to the reopening of 7 cold cases and the launch of a comprehensive investigation into what some locals were calling the mine closure phenomenon. Harrison's investigation revealed several disturbing commonalities among the cases. All 7 disappearances occurred between 10:00 p.m. and 2:00 a.m. All 7 individuals had been seen leaving their workplaces for the final time. In all 7 cases, personal belongings, money, and vehicles were left behind, suggesting no intention of fleeing. The investigation took an even stranger turn when Harrison interviewed family members and co-workers of the missing individuals. Several reported that the victims had made unusual comments in the days leading up to their disappearances. Robert's wife told investigators that her husband had mentioned having to stay with the mine after it closed. Mitchell's roommate recalled Sarah saying she had one more duty to perform before leaving the area. Perhaps most disturbing were the reports from co-workers who had worked the final shifts with the missing individuals. Several described unusual phenomena during those last days. Unexplained noises from deep within the mines, strange lights visible in abandoned shafts, and an overwhelming sense of being watched by unseen presences. The Knott County Sheriff's Department requested assistance from the Kentucky State Police and the FBI. A task force was formed to investigate the possible connections between the cases. Ground-penetrating radar was used to examine areas around the closed mines, but no human remains were discovered. Divers searched nearby lakes and rivers, again finding nothing. The investigation expanded to include interviews with former mine employees from across eastern Kentucky. Several reported similar experiences during mine closures in other counties. though no official disappearances had been documented in those areas. These reports suggested that what Chen had discovered in Knott County might be part of a larger, undocumented phenomenon. In January 2018, the task force held a press conference to announce their findings. Sheriff David Thompson acknowledged the pattern of disappearances, but emphasized that no evidence of criminal activity had been discovered. He noted that the investigation remained ongoing and asked the public for any information that might help solve the cases. Chen, whose research had sparked the investigation, continued to explore the phenomenon on her own. She interviewed folklorists, historians, and retired miners, searching for any explanation that might make sense of the disappearances. One elderly miner told her about an old belief among Appalachian miners, that the mines themselves had a consciousness, a spirit that demanded payment for the resources taken from the earth. They used to say that when a mine closed, someone had to stay behind to keep watch, the miner told Chen. Not because the company asked them to, but because the mine itself called them back. It was just a story people told, nothing more. At least, that's what we thought. The Knott County Sheriff's Department maintains active files on all 7 disappearances, with the most recent entry dated December 2022. Detective Harrison, who retired in 2021, added a final note to the master file. After extensive investigation, no rational explanation for these disappearances has been found. The cases remain unsolved. No trace of any of the 7 missing individuals has ever been discovered. It was late April of 2019 when former miner Benjamin Watkins returned to the abandoned Mount Carmel mine in Bell County for the first time in 30 years. What Watkins intended as a final farewell to the place that had shaped his life would become one of the most unsettling encounters ever documented in the region's law enforcement records. Watkins, a 67-year-old retired construction worker, had worked at the Mount Carmel mine from 1975 until its closure in 1989. He had been part of the crew that sealed the mine's main entrance, a task he remembered with both pride and sadness. On April 28, 2019, accompanied by his adult son Michael, Watkins made the 2-hour drive from his home in Lexington to the remote mountain site where he had spent 14 years of his life. The father and son arrived at the mine entrance around 11:00 a.m. The area showed the expected signs of 3 decades of abandonment. Vegetation overgrowing the access road, rusted equipment scattered about, and the main seal covered in graffiti. Watkins pointed out various features to his son, sharing stories of his time as a miner. As they approached the main entrance, Watkins noticed something that troubled him. The concrete seal, which he had helped pour and which should have been 3 feet thick, appeared to have been breached. A hole approximately 3 feet in diameter had been cut through the center of the seal, creating an opening into the mine. Concerned about possible illegal activity, Watkins called the Bell County Sheriff's Department at 11:27 a.m. Deputy Sarah Miller was dispatched to investigate, arriving at the scene at 12:15 p.m. After examining the breach, Miller advised Watkins and his son to wait outside, while she conducted a preliminary investigation of the mine entrance. Miller entered the mine approximately 50 feet, using a powerful flashlight to illuminate the passage. She noted that the air inside was unusually fresh, with none of the stagnant quality expected in a sealed mine. More disturbingly, she found fresh footprints in the dust on the floor prints that appeared to have been made within the past 24 hours. Unable to determine whether anyone might still be inside the mine, Miller called for backup. 2 additional deputies arrived at 1 p.m., along with the county's emergency management director. After a brief discussion, they decided to conduct a more thorough search of the mine's entrance area. Watkins, concerned for the deputies' safety, offered to accompany them, citing his extensive knowledge of the mine's layout. The emergency management director agreed, and Watkins joined the search party as they entered the mine. What they found inside would challenge everything Watkins thought he knew about the place he had once considered a second home. The main passage extended approximately 500 feet before branching into multiple tunnels. Watkins noted that while the general layout matched his memory, several details were wrong. Support timbers that should have been weathered were solid and new-looking. Areas that he remembered as low-ceilinged were now tall enough to walk upright. And passages that should have been dead ends continued into darkness. The search party followed the fresh footprints deeper into the mine, eventually arriving at what Watkins identified as Section 7, the area where he had worked during his final years at Mount Carmel. What they found there made no sense. The section appeared to be in active operation, though no workers were present. Mining equipment, all of modern design, was positioned throughout the area. The coal face showed signs of recent cutting, with fresh coal scattered on the floor. Most disturbingly, a lunch table sat in the center of the area, set with 4 plates, cups, and utensils, as if waiting for miners to return from their work. The Bell County Sheriff's Department immediately launched a full investigation. Mine safety officials were called in to examine the site. What they found defied explanation. The equipment, though clearly modern and recently used, bore no serial numbers or manufacturer identification. The coal in the face matched the Mount Carmel seam, but mining records showed that this section had been completely exhausted by 1988. The investigation expanded to include federal agencies. The FBI interviewed local residents and business owners, searching for anyone who might have information about illegal mining operations. The MSHA conducted its own investigation, eventually concluding that the mine appeared to be in operation through unknown means by unknown persons. Perhaps most disturbing were the results of forensic analysis of the lunch table. Fingerprints found on the plates and cups matched no records in any database. Analysis of food residue indicated that the meal had been consumed within 12 hours of the discovery. Yet no one had been seen entering or leaving the mine during that time. The Bell County Sheriff's Department maintained an active investigation for 6 months before moving the case to cold case status. The mine was resealed with a concrete barrier twice as thick as the original, and surveillance cameras were installed to monitor the area. Watkins, shaken by his experience, returned to Lexington and never visited the mine again. In a 2021 interview, he said, "I spent 14 years of my life in that mountain. I know every tunnel, every shaft, every support beam. What we found in there wasn't the mine I remember. It was something else wearing its skin. The sealed entrance remains under surveillance, but no further activity has been reported. No explanation for the operating mine section has ever been found. The American landscape remains vast and unknowable, perhaps nowhere more so than in the hollows of Kentucky's coal country. These mountains, which have given so much of themselves to fuel our nation's growth, hold secrets that defy our understanding of the natural world. The stories we've explored tonight, from mysterious lights to impossible tunnels, from unexplained disappearances to voices from beyond, represent only a fraction of the phenomena documented in sheriff's files across the region. What connects these disparate accounts is not just their geographic proximity, but their resistance to logical explanation. In each case, trained professionals, law enforcement officers, mining experts, search and rescue volunteers encountered phenomena that operated outside the boundaries of their experience and expertise. These were not superstitious miners or overactive imaginations, but credible witnesses documenting events that challenged their understanding of reality. The coal fields of Kentucky have shaped generations of families, creating communities bound by shared hardship and mutual dependence. This close-knit culture has produced individuals with practical knowledge of the land and its resources. People who can read the mountains like others read books. Yet even these experts, with their intimate understanding of the region's geology and history, find themselves at a loss when confronted with the inexplicable. Perhaps what these stories reveal is not that the supernatural exists, but that our understanding of the natural world remains incomplete. The Appalachian Mountains are among the oldest on Earth, bearing the weight of eons in their stone and soil. Who can say what forces, what energies, what memories might be stored in these ancient formations, waiting for the right conditions to manifest themselves? What strikes me most about these accounts is their quiet persistence. Unlike dramatic horror stories with clear beginnings and endings, these phenomena continue without resolution, becoming part of the region's oral tradition while simultaneously being documented in official files. They exist in that liminal space between folklore and fact, between what can be proven and what can be experienced. The sheriff's departments that maintain these files do so with a pragmatic acknowledgement that some cases will never be solved. These aren't mysteries to be cracked, but phenomena to be documented, recorded for future generations who might have better tools for understanding them. The files sit alongside records of more conventional crimes, a testament to the open-mindedness of law enforcement professionals who recognize that not everything can be explained by current knowledge. As we conclude tonight's journey through Kentucky's coal country, we're left with more questions than answers. What causes the mysterious lights near abandoned mines? Who left the impossible footprints in Floyd County? Where did the sealed section of the Breathitt County mine come from? These questions may never be answered to everyone's satisfaction, but their existence reminds us that the world still holds mysteries beyond